There is a kind of silence that doesn't stem from coldness, exhaustion, or any desire to manipulate. It is a silence that is consciously chosen, a silence born from inner strength, from awakening after deep wounds, from finally understanding I no longer need to give my energy to a place that no longer deserves it. When a super empath goes no contact with a narcissist, it's not just about stopping the texts, blocking the number, or deleting social media accounts. It marks a psychological milestone. It's an unspoken declaration. I no longer belong to that cycle. I choose myself. To a narcissist, this is unacceptable. In their world, every relationship is a means to control, to demand attention, to uphold their distorted sense of self through someone else's reflection, and in their eyes, no one sees, loves, or forgives more deeply than a super empath. They believe you'll always come back, that your heart will soften, that you'll never fully walk away. But then the one thing they never expected happens. You disappear into complete silence. No anger, no pleading, no explanations, no need for closure, and no return. What makes someone who once loved so deeply, who was endlessly patient, who held on to hope for change, finally decide to cut all ties forever? This video is the answer to that question. We're going to dive into what really happens when a super empath walks away from a toxic relationship. We'll examine the deep psychological reaction of the narcissist when they lose the one person who ever truly saw them. And more importantly, we'll understand why a super empath's silence isn't about escape. It's a courageous act of protecting truth, dignity, and healing. If you've ever loved deeply and been deeply wounded, if you're on the journey of leaving behind a relationship that no longer serves your well-being, if you've always been the one to forgive, to try to understand, to hold on, then this video is for you. Before we can truly understand what happens when a super empath goes no contact with a narcissist, we first need to understand who they are. A super empath is not weak, nor are they naive. On the contrary, they are individuals with an extraordinary level of emotional intelligence, profound empathy, and an intuition so sharp they can feel someone else's emotions through a single glance, a shift in tone, or subtle changes in the surrounding energy. They don't just understand others, they sense them. They can read unspoken pain. They listen patiently to what others tend to overlook. And that's what makes them a light in the eyes of many, including narcissists. Narcissists are drawn to super empaths not out of love, but because of the steady emotional energy they can extract from them. Super empaths love fully. They forgive over and over, not because they are weak, but because they always see the potential for change in others. They believe in redemption, in healing, and in the goodness buried within even the most chaotic soul. To the narcissist, this is the perfect supply. Super empaths react deeply to emotions, don't give up easily, and constantly try to understand the reasons behind someone's behavior. They endure wounds, hoping love will heal them. They believe that if they're patient enough, compassionate enough, the other person will eventually change, and that's precisely why they often remain trapped the longest in toxic relationships. They don't let go easily, not because they don't see the problem, but because they believe real love can redeem. That belief becomes their greatest vulnerability, a vulnerability the narcissist is keenly aware of and exploits to the fullest. But here's what the narcissist never anticipates. Super empaths have limits too. They are not as fragile as their calm exterior may suggest. They endure quietly until they realize that what they're trying to heal isn't just a wound, but a deep void of manipulation, deceit, and denial of responsibility. And once that realization hits, once they understand they've been turned into a tool to sustain someone's distorted ego, everything shifts. The trust vanishes, empathy is replaced with clarity, and love becomes the fuel that empowers them to set themselves free. When a super empath awakens, they stop trying to heal the narcissist. They begin turning inward, asking themselves, why did I stay so long? Why did I believe I could save someone who didn't want to be saved? And once the answer surfaces, they no longer need closure. They don't need arguments, explanations, or blame. They simply walk away in silence. No doors left open, no thread of hope for the other person to cling to. It's not coldness. It's a decision grounded in self-respect and hard-won understanding. That's why the narcissist doesn't just lose a source of supply. They lose the only person who ever truly saw the human in them and loved them in spite of it all. And for someone who survives on control, the cruelest blow of all is losing the one they manipulated the most, to strength, to silence, and to a freedom they can never take back. No awakening ever happens overnight. For the super empath, realizing the truth about their relationship with a narcissist is a painful journey, but it's also the turning point that leads to true freedom. At first, they often fall into self-doubt. They ask themselves, am I just being too sensitive? Maybe I'm the one causing the problems. I should be more patient. They're probably just hurting. These thoughts loop over and over because the super empath always tries to see the good that remains in others. They believe in transformation, in the power of forgiveness, and in the idea that love, if strong enough, can heal any wound. But then, one day, something shifts. It's not loud or dramatic. Often it's a quiet moment. A familiar phrase suddenly feels empty. An apology sounds like a recycled script. A small truth slips through, and this time, they can no longer lie to themselves. In that moment, the super empath stops focusing on the narcissist's pain. They begin looking inward. The questions they ask are no longer about the other person, but about their own suffering. Why am I always the one who has to sacrifice? Why is my kindness seen as weakness? Why must I endure pain just to hold on to a relationship that only benefits one side? And when those questions are answered with raw truth, the awakening begins. There's no more blaming, no more making excuses for someone who repeatedly hurt them, no more forcing themselves to live up to the image of the one who always understands. The super empath starts to see clearly they deserve so much more than this. From that point on, empathy is replaced by clarity. Kindness still exists, but now it's accompanied by boundaries. Love is still there, but no longer at the cost of self-abandonment. And most importantly, their belief changes. They no longer believe they can save the other person. They begin to understand this. You cannot heal someone who chooses to hurt others in order to survive. This phase often comes with a whirlwind of complex emotions, pain, regret, even anger toward themselves for staying so long. But at the same time, it's the beginning of something profound, of reconnecting with the strongest part of who they are, their self-respect. And when that self-respect returns, everything changes. They no longer need answers from the other person. They no longer need an apology to feel seen. They no longer need a happy ending to find peace. They begin to understand the only way to reclaim your life is to walk away, quietly but firmly. There's no dramatic ending, no tearful goodbyes or explosive fights. The super empath simply stops participating. They stop reacting, stop explaining, stop trying. And when they choose silence, not because they have nothing left to say, but because they finally see it all clearly, that's when, for the first time, the narcissist experiences something they never expected. The power dynamic has shifted. That awakening doesn't just free the super empath from the toxic relationship. It marks the birth of a new version of themselves, stronger, wiser, and no longer easily pulled into the emotional games that once held them captive. To the narcissist, every relationship is a form of control. Love isn't built on genuine connection, but on the feeling of power, the power to demand, to be admired, to make others react on their terms. And when someone walks away from that dynamic, the narcissist will do anything to pull them back. But when that someone is a super empath who has awakened and chosen to go fully no contact, a real psychological shockwave takes place. The first thing the narcissist feels is disorientation. Super empaths don't leave like everyone else. They don't cry, they don't threaten, they don't beg. They disappear, quietly, leaving behind no emotional anchor. And it's that stillness that the narcissist cannot handle. They begin to panic, but it's a silent, toxic kind of panic. They check your social media, scanning for signs that you still care. They send short, casual messages like, "Hope you're doing okay," or "This song reminded me of you," but none of it comes from genuine concern. The goal is to test the waters. Will you respond? Do you still belong to them? When there's no reaction, the narcissist enters a state of temporary psychological chaos. They may start rewriting the narrative, that you abandoned them for no reason, that you're the one with issues, that you've changed. They project an image of a counterfeit narcissist, cheerful, happy, finally with someone better, but the truth is they're battling the void you left behind. The super empath wasn't just a partner, a companion, they were a mirror. The only person who ever saw the real human behind the narcissist's mask. And when you leave, without a glance, without a message, without needing closure, the narcissist is forced to face their greatest fear, the absence of someone to validate their existence. Worse, the super empath doesn't just disappear, they grow. They heal, they find peace, they rebuild their life without needing to prove anything to anyone. And that calm, steady presence from afar sends the narcissist into emotional turmoil, because they now realize the tools they once used to control you no longer work. Every message, every flashy post, every mind game, they're met with silence. No one's playing anymore. That's when the collapse begins. Quietly, no tears, no apologies, just an echoing fear. They've lost the one person who loved them sincerely, who saw their true self, and now that person doesn't need them anymore. Narcissists aren't used to being without a starring role in someone's life, but when a super empath cuts them off completely, they don't just lose the role, they lose the stage. No one left to perform for, no audience left to manipulate. And that silence, it's not just absence, it's a psychological verdict. I've seen everything and I choose to walk away. The truth is, no words break a narcissist faster than the unwavering silence of someone who sees clearly, because it proves that you have nothing left to ask, nothing left to prove, and nothing left to lose. To the narcissist, that's not just an ending, it's the unraveling of the very power they once believed they had. No one walks away from a relationship with a narcissist without scars, and super empaths are no exception. But the difference is this: they don't let those wounds define them. They allow them to transform them. The healing process after leaving a narcissist is far from easy. It begins with emptiness. The super empath doesn't just lose someone they once cared for, they lose a part of themselves they had poured into loving, fixing, and holding on to something they once believed was real. But in the end, they come to realize what they were clinging to wasn't love. It was an illusion, carefully constructed through manipulation and dishonesty. The early stages of going no contact are often marked by a deep silence, not just with the narcissist, but within themselves. The super empath needs time to understand what they've just lived through. They begin to piece together every moment they silently endured, every forgiveness that went unappreciated, every controlling behavior disguised as love. And when the truth finally surfaces, they no longer feel guilty for walking away. On the contrary, they begin to feel proud for having the courage to end it. And that's when the transformation begins. The super empath doesn't heal just by retreating. They heal by returning to themselves. They learn to set clear boundaries, not to punish anyone, but to protect their own peace. They learn to say no without guilt. They learn to love without losing themselves in the process of trying to please someone else. Most importantly, they no longer seek love to feel validated. because now they validate themselves. They no longer need anyone else to recognize their worth in order to believe in it. They don't need a relationship to feel whole. That kind of inner freedom is something the narcissist can never access, and it's exactly what makes the super empath emerge as someone completely new after stepping out of the darkness. One of the clearest signs of this transformation is that they no longer feel the need to expose the narcissist. They don't need to broadcast what happened. They don't need to prove they were the victim. Because they understand, true peace doesn't come from others finally seeing you were right. It comes from no longer needing them to. It is also the moment when they begin to open up to a new definition of love. A love that doesn't require the sacrifice of identity, that doesn't demand silent suffering, that doesn't force you to prove your worth. And even if they're not ready to love someone else just yet, they've started loving themselves in a healthy way, with respect, with compassion, and with deep gratitude for the courage it took to walk away. The person who was once the perfect target is now a stronger, wiser version of themselves, no longer easily manipulated by anyone, not because they become cold or hardened, but because they've learned the most important lesson of all. Kindness should never be wasted where it's not cherished, and maybe that's the greatest freedom of all. Not just the freedom from the other person, but the freedom from the version of yourself who once accepted pain just to call it love. Where the super empath is still in the relationship, the narcissist holds the power. They decide when to be close and when to withdraw. They come in with words of love, then retreat with cold indifference. They make the other person feel like they're never enough, always needing to try harder. And in that emotional tug-of-war, the power lies entirely in their hands. But everything begins to shift the moment the super empath pulls away. And when they walk away without a final word, without a goodbye, without needing one more explanation, the power dynamic flips. What the narcissist cannot bear isn't your physical absence, it's your emotional absence. You're no longer within their sphere of influence. You're no longer reacting, no longer seeking validation, no longer trapped in the cycle of manipulation. And that makes them feel invisible. For the first time, in a game they created, the person who once served as a steady source of emotional supply now becomes a mirror reflecting a harsh truth. They have no power left, no influence, no center stage. What makes this situation so devastating for the narcissist is that they can't make sense of what happened. In their world, the super empath was the most emotionally vulnerable, the most forgiving, the one they believed would never truly leave. And yet, here you are, the only one who left without leaving a door open. No let's talk when things calm down. No, I'll be here if you change. Nothing. In that void, the narcissist is forced to face what they've avoided their entire life. Themselves. Without the mask, it's a painful moment, because for someone who survives on external reflection, losing the gaze of the super empath feels like being erased from existence. They no longer know who they are without someone to manipulate. They can't perform without an audience. They've lost the lead role in a script no one wants to play anymore. When you go no contact and simply live your life, growing, healing and moving forward without speaking of them, without retaliating, without sending a message, you're delivering the one message they can't comprehend. I don't need to defeat you, I just need to let go. And that shakes the very foundation of the power they once believed was theirs. Many narcissists in this stage spiral into emotional chaos. Some become increasingly toxic, trying to smear your name as a last-ditch attempt to feel like they still matter. Others might pretend to feel remorse, show up as the changed version of themselves, hoping to test if your heart is still soft. But no matter the reaction, the root is always the same: fear of losing control. And here's the remarkable part. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to expose them. You don't have to win an argument. Simply continuing to walk away, quietly and steadily, is enough to force them to face the one truth they cannot escape. You saw their true nature and still chose to leave. This reversal of power doesn't come from revenge. It comes from your growth, from no longer needing validation or an apology or closure. You're clear enough now that you don't need to hear one more thing. And that calm, that silence, that unwavering release without resentment, that is what renders the narcissist truly powerless. They once believed you were the easiest to control, but in the end you became the one person they could never manipulate forever. When a super empath chooses no contact, it's not just about blocking messages or avoiding interaction. It's a spiritual and emotional turning point, a refusal to step once more into the chaos. A quiet yet resolute declaration, I've been hurt enough, and now I choose myself. Some people won't understand. They'll say you're cold, cruel, that you disappeared out of nowhere. They'll say you're avoiding or overreacting. But only you know what really happened in that relationship. Only you know how hard you tried, how many times you forgave, how much of yourself you gave up, to hold on to something that in the end wasn't real love. Your silence doesn't mean you no longer feel. On the contrary, it's because your emotions run deep that you need to protect them. It's because your heart once gave so much that you've had to learn how to save some of it for yourself. No contact isn't punishment. It's not reverse manipulation. It's an act of self-rescue. It's stepping away from a cycle you know will never lead to peace. It's refusing to be hurt again by sweet words that mean nothing, by apologies that repeat like clockwork, by promises that never materialize. You don't need closure because you closed the door yourself, from the inside. You don't need an apology from the one who hurt you, because you've forgiven yourself for staying too long. You don't need anyone to understand you in order to feel valid. You only need peace. And you've chosen it. True liberation doesn't come from watching the narcissist break down, regret, or beg to come back. It comes from no longer needing any of that to feel worthy. It comes from reclaiming yourself. A self that is stronger, more aware, and more deeply loving toward who you truly are. You didn't leave the darkness to seek revenge. You left to step into the light. And if that light makes others uncomfortable, that doesn't mean you owe it to anyone to dim it. Because now you understand. The light isn't there to please others. It's there to show you your own path. And if you're here, quietly healing, learning how to love yourself again, making it through each day with wounds still tender, know this: you are not alone. There are millions of others just like you, people who gave too much, hurt too deeply, and are now slowly reclaiming their inner freedom. You are not weak for loving deeply. You are not foolish for trusting. You are brave because you had the courage to stop when you realized it was no longer worth it. And if you need someone to tell you this today, then let this be the message. You did the right thing. You deserve peace. You don't have to go back to prove anything, because in the moment you cut contact, held your silence, and chose to live, you didn't just leave someone else. You came home to yourself.